Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Leeson here. Today's top stories. Home Secretary Priti Patel announces the biggest overhaul of the UK's asylum system. 14 people were arrested during a second night of protest in central Bristol. And the government approves oil and gas exploration in the North Sea. The Home Office is introducing new asylum-seeking rules, making it more difficult for migrants to enter through illegal means to stay in the UK.
Home Secretary Priti Patel says the new plan for immigration is the biggest overhaul of the UK's asylum system in decades. For the first time, people seeking asylum will have their claim assessed based on how they arrive in the UK.
At the heart of our new plan for immigration is a simple principle: fairness. Access to UK's asylum system should be based on need, not the ability to pay people smugglers.
For those who enter the UK illegally or via a safe country, they will not have the same entitlement as those who arrive legally, even if they are granted asylum. They will only get temporary protection status.
This is not an automatic right to settle. They will be regularly reassessed for removal and will include limited access to benefits and limited family reunion rights.
The new rules seek to deter illegal entry into the UK and break the business model of people smugglers.
Our tough new stance will also include new maximum life sentences for people smugglers and facilitators, new rules to stop unscrupulous people posing as children.
The Home Secretary says the new rules will impact asylum seekers who illegally come to the UK, crossing the English Channel in small boats from France.
Because while people are dying, we have a responsibility to act. People are dying at sea, in lorries and in shipping containers, having put their lives in the hands of criminal gangs that facilitate illegal journeys to the UK. To stop the deaths, we must stop the trade in people that cause them.
In the new rules, the government hopes to streamline the appeals system and remove rejected applicants more rapidly.
Because for too long, our justice system has been gamed. Almost 3/4 of migrants in detention raise last-minute new claims, challenges or other issues.
But genuine asylum seekers fleeing persecution or violence and entering the UK via legal routes will get permission to remain indefinitely, straight away. Refugee Council Chief Executive Envoy accused the Home Office of creating a two-tier system, claiming some refugees will be unfairly punished. Patel reveals that over 60% of asylum applicants currently in the system entered the UK illegally. She added that since 2015, almost 25,000 asylum seekers have settled in the UK, and the UK also welcomed more than 29,000 close relatives of the refugees.
Tuesday night, Bristol city centre saw a second protest with 14 people arrested. Police also released some images related to the protest on Sunday and is appealing for the public's help.
Tuesday's protest was mainly peaceful. It started with 200 people gathering in Bristol city centre. Some protesters set up tents and a sound system, intending to stay there overnight. Police encouraged people to leave but failed. Then, by 10 p.m, police took action to remove them. Police say specialist police dog units, horses, the National Police Air Service and a police drone unit were involved in the operation. Some protesters refused to leave the grass outside City Hall. A police statement says 14 were arrested for offences including breaches of lockdown restrictions and obstructing a highway. Among them, one was also arrested for offences related to the riot on Sunday night. The protesters once again demonstrating against the government's police and crime bill, but police say public gatherings are not allowed during lockdown. On Tuesday, police also released 10 images of suspects from Sunday night's riot, 6 men and 4 women. Police say more than 100 officers and staff are working on one of the largest investigations in Avon and Somerset Police's history. During the riot, 21 police officers were injured, 2 seriously. Police confirm that 8 men aged between 20 and 44 were arrested and that all but 1 have since been released. British newspaper The Guardian reported that a 28-year-old man from Bristol appeared at Bristol Magistrates Court on Tuesday in connection with Sunday's events. He was charged with possessing an offensive weapon, a homemade spear with a sharpened edge. He denied the offence. Bristol's local media say demonstrators are planning on social media a third protest for this coming Friday.
Ministers will allow oil and gas exploration in the North Sea to find new reserves. Applications would need to be compatible with the UK's climate change objectives. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the details.
The Guardian reports ministers have approved exploration for oil and gas in the North Sea, and drilling can start if a climate compatibility test is passed. The government has pledged £16 billion to help the energy industry reduce carbon emissions. The industry has in turn promised to halve its emissions by 2030. Business and Energy Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng told the BBC the UK will not leave oil and gas workers behind in the irreversible shift away from fossil fuels. In support, the Chief Executive of Oil and Gas UK said, ongoing exploration and production is compatible with net zero emissions. We're pleased the government has recognised this. Net zero refers to extractions that produce the same amount of carbon dioxide as it removes from the atmosphere. Greenpeace UK criticised the deal as a colossal failure in climate leadership, ahead of a UN climate conference later this year in Scotland. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
EU ministers agreed on Tuesday to extend to the end of July the bloc's catch limits for fish stocks shared with the UK. They want to ensure fishing can continue uninterrupted while Brussels and London seek a four-year deal. In their Brexit deal, the EU and the UK agreed to jointly set limits each year for fishing their shared stocks. They had hoped to negotiate this month a four-year fishing agreement for 2021. As a temporary solution, the EU decided to keep applying last year's EU catch limits for shared stocks until July the 31st. And in other news, as England slowly reopens, the government is looking at whether people should have to provide proof of vaccination against COVID-19 through a domestic vaccine passport. Some warn the idea brings legal and ethical challenges. Here's NTD's Jane Well with the story.
With more than 28 million people in the UK receiving their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, a parliamentary committee is reviewing the idea of a vaccine passport that would prove you've had the jab. It could give people more freedom and access to venues. The former Brexit secretary, though, has concerns that a domestic vaccine passport system would break the law.
Firstly, the impact of this would be discriminatory. Under the law, it would be indirectly discriminatory, and that is illegal. What this proposal does is, in effect, coerce those people, and that's also against a number of international conventions we're signatories to. And indeed, just recently, the Council of Europe passed a resolution saying, 732 said, that ensure that citizens are informed that vaccination is not mandatory and that no one is politically, socially or otherwise pressured.
Also giving evidence to the committee on Tuesday was the director of civil liberty group Big Brother Watch, who similarly raised concerns about privacy and discrimination. The review into vaccine passports also bring up scientific concerns. While the vaccine may be effective in reducing the risk of severe COVID-19 symptoms, it's not yet known if they have an effect on transmission. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
Spain said on Tuesday it was easing a ban on travel from Britain. British travellers will be allowed in Spain from 30th of March, but British holidaymakers can't get booking just yet as it's only for work, education or imperative health reasons. There's also the UK's own ban on foreign travel to lift before holidays can resume. Travel into Spain is only permitted with a negative COVID-19 test result. Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced May 17th as the earliest expected date for foreign travel to resume. And in other news, Germany's extended its own lockdown, trying to deal with the new CCP virus variants. But business groups warn it'll lead to even more bankruptcies for industries that are already struggling. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Germany's extending its lockdown until April 18th. Lobby groups say this could drive more businesses into bankruptcy. The president of one retail association said, "After 1 year with coronavirus, the situation for many retailers is desperate. There is no longer any hope of surviving this crisis economically." Tourism and auto associations also criticised the extended lockdown, warning of bankruptcies in their industries as well. But Germans on the street had mixed reactions.
We have a problem with the pandemic and we must fight it together somehow. We have to pull ourselves together.
Another passerby disagrees.
There are all those measures, but they don't get us anywhere. As you can see, 1 year later, we're still in the same situation.
The extended lockdown means citizens can't go on vacation in their own country, but they can travel abroad. One holiday apartment owner says the rules don't make sense.
You can't be better protected than in a holiday apartment, and yet it's okay to fly to Mallorca if you're tested? But you can't stay in a Bavarian holiday apartment or elsewhere in Germany, even with a test? It's simply incomprehensible what's going on right now.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel says new CCP virus variants are more infectious, and carriers are infectious for a longer period of time. Merkel says things are tough for longer than expected, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Easter's coming soon and some Germans are planning on taking a vacation in Spain. But Spaniards themselves can't because of a ban on domestic tourism.
Tens of thousands of Germans are planning last-minute Easter getaways to Spain's sun-kissed islands. That's not going down too well.
In Spain, we can't move between regions because of the lockdown, but foreigners can arrive at Barajas airport and spread infection. It seems like foreigners don't infect, but Madrid residents and the rest of the Spaniards have to stay home.
Those foreigners do need a negative test result to fly in. But given that countries like France and Germany currently have high infection rates, top health official Fernando Simon described the situation as incongruous. Lufthansa's discount carrier Eurowings has set up 300 extra flights to Mallorca over Easter. And while Berlin has removed parts of Spain, including Mallorca, from its coronavirus risk list, hotels in Germany itself are closed. The contradictions aren't lost on some German tourists either, even ones about to hop on a flight to Mallorca.
From the Spaniards' point of view, I can totally understand it. Quite honestly, travelling during times of coronavirus is a privilege, and so I have to admit, overall, it's rather irresponsible.
Despite widespread grumbling, the return of sun-seeking Germans will provide a welcome shot in the arm to the ailing tourism industry. Foreign visitors to Spain fell 80% to 19 million in 2020. The lowest level since 1969.
Up next, men tend to be the silent half, but a nationwide movement is connecting men with each other to support their mental health. Find out more about that when we return. EU countries are rejecting the sanctions the Chinese Communist Party placed on 10 individuals in the EU. It's largely seen as China's response to EU-imposed sanctions placed on 4 Chinese officials for human rights abuses in Xinjiang. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
For one, the Netherlands summoned China's ambassador to The Hague, the city home to the Dutch parliament. And Belgian Foreign Minister Sophie Wilmes announced on Twitter that Belgium strongly rejects the announcement of the Chinese authorities to sanction EU entities and especially EU Parliament members. Germany also joined in. Foreign Minister Heiko Maas wrote on Twitter that China's sanctions against parliamentarians and scientific institutes in the EU in response to China's actions are completely incomprehensible. France is also said to summon China's ambassador to Paris. European Parliament President David Sassoli says he supports the 10 European politicians penalized by China, as well as the other EU individuals and bodies that are affected. A number of European politicians on China's sanction list wasted no time in speaking out, making statements immediately after the sanctions were announced. In a tweet, EU Parliament member Raphael Glucksmann from France called the sanctions his Medal of Honor, adding that the fight continues. Sjoerd Sjoerdsma, a parliamentarian from the Netherlands, also responded, "As long as China commits genocide on the Uyghurs, I will not remain silent." Another parliamentarian, Samuel Cocolati from Belgium, referring to the sanctions, he wrote, "That won't stop us. Our duty as parliamentarians is to defend democracy and human rights."
France has summoned the Chinese ambassador. That's after the Chinese embassy in the country called a French scholar a mad dog and a little thug for supporting Taiwan. NTD's Penny Joel has more.
China's ambassador to France has been summoned by Paris officials. This after the ambassador last week advised French politicians not to meet with Taiwanese officials during their upcoming visit to Taiwan this summer. Beijing claims the self-ruled democratic island as its own territory and has threatened to forcibly reunite it with mainland China. The Chinese embassy also took aim at a Paris-based China expert, calling him a little thug, a crazed hyena, and an ideological troll with an anti-Chinese stance. That's after the expert criticized China for pressuring France about Taiwan and for interfering with French democracy. In a Friday statement, the Chinese embassy accused the expert of kneeling to Taiwan's government and said he, quote, crazily opposes everything related to China. It went on to justify China's wolf warrior diplomacy style, saying the aggressive approach is necessary because of some so-called mad dogs who use their status as scholars or the media to attack China. The French Foreign Ministry called the Chinese embassy's statement unacceptable. Its foreign minister wrote on Twitter that in their relations with China, there's no room for insults and intimidation against officials and researchers. He also voiced support for the French expert. The ministry said it would remind the Chinese ambassador of the basic rules on diplomacy. Chinese state media published multiple articles targeting the French expert, though the expert called it an honor to be targeted by China. In an interview with French media, he said it's important that French authorities react to the comments. He said, quote, China is giving us a test. We have to show it that there is a limit and that it has been reached. Penny Joel, NTD News.
A coalition of human rights groups is urging vacation rental website Airbnb to drop its sponsorship for the International Olympic Committee. It's over the Beijing Winter Games next year and the Chinese regime's human rights abuses. Vacation rental platform Airbnb is one of the 15 leading sponsors of the International Olympic Committee, or IOC. In an open letter to Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky, a coalition of over 190 human rights groups argues that Airbnb is trying to promote tourism in China at the expense of Uyghurs and Tibetans. It says Airbnb is glossing over Communist China's horrifying human rights record. The communist regime has detained an estimated 1 million Uyghur Muslims in the Xinjiang region. Airbnb signed up to be a top sponsor for the IOC in late 2019. Human rights groups are also sending a similar message to other IOC sponsors. Some are calling for a boycott of the Beijing Winter Games. On the other hand, the IOC says it will not move the 2022 Games out of Communist China and that it will maintain what it calls political neutrality. And in other news, with a growing threat from China on the horizon, Japan is amping up cooperation with allies like the US. NTD's Juliet Song has the latest.
The US and Japan have reportedly made a deal. If China gets into a military conflict with Taiwan, the two allied nations will work together to respond to the emergency. Japanese news agency Kyodo News reported the story, citing multiple government sources. It says the U.S. reached an agreement with Japanese defense minister last week that says China has been ramping up its military aggressions. Japan isn't too far from Taiwan, so Taiwan's security matters to Japan as well. But they both face a tricky situation. The Chinese regime sees Taiwan as part of mainland Chinese territory, and it has been threatening to take it back by force. Tensions are rising over the Taiwan Strait. Chinese warplanes have been breaching airspace over the median line. The line marks the unofficial buffer zone between China and Taiwan. China has also been boosting pressure on Japan. Beijing now allows its Coast Guard ships to open fire at foreign vessels if they're in China-controlled waters. The problem is China has disputed waters with Japan, and Chinese ships often enter these areas. Kyodo News says both the US and Japan believe the escalating tensions in the Taiwan Strait could lead to military conflicts. The U.S. brought up the topic of the potential conflict, but didn't give specific solutions. And the Japanese side is considering how to help the U.S. military if it comes to aid Taiwan. The two sides also agreed to hold military drills around the disputed islands. Japan is also strengthening cooperation with Germany. The two just signed a pact to make it easier to share defense-related intelligence. Germany has been closely watching the Indo-Pacific as China's influence grows in the region. Berlin is set to send a warship into the region as early as this summer. A U.S.-based China commentator says the Chinese Communist Party is to blame for the rising tensions.
The Chinese Communist Party is eager to push its plan to dominate the world and its plan of promoting socialism around the globe. It's becoming increasingly arrogant.
Juliet Song, NTD News.
Now, men are not naturals at being open about their mental health. That's where Men in Sheds come in. They are accessible community groups that provide resources and a place to open up. NTD's Neil Woodrow finds out more.
Men are less likely to access psychological therapies, and nearly 3/4 of adults who go missing are men. Samaritan's policy manager Joe Potter says, "Our research has demonstrated that effective support should facilitate two key things: meaningful connections and purposeful activity. Community groups are playing their role." I'm here at the Sutton Men in Sheds group, where they engage and give support to men struggling with mental health issues. This group is a relatively new addition to the community of Men in Sheds, which are dotted all over the country and beyond. Around a dozen members join in with the regular meetings. Because of the lockdown, they are virtual, sharing their feelings, thoughts with each other in a supportive environment. This group is run under the wings of the charity Community Action Sutton. I met with the group's lead organiser, Daniel. He thinks the group is very important.
From a lot of men we've spoken to, and not just men, professions as well, there's not a lot of groups out there for men where they could actually come together and form friendship, enjoy that peer-to-peer support, if you like.
He says mental health issues are on the rise for both men and women.
And for men in particular, because we tend not to open up or ask for help. It's sometimes more difficult. For example, 3 out of every 4 suicides is committed by a man. And so a group like this really provides men the opportunity to meet and get the support they need.
I also spoke with 2 of the group's members. Jason told me about his childhood.
From a child, I witnessed a lot of abuse within the household between my mother that had severe mental health issues and also my stepfather. So having some understanding on where I should be in life was very confusing.
And in his teens,
I ended up being homeless, living on the streets, getting involved in crowds of people that I shouldn't have got, but it still happened.
Blind to it himself, alcoholism for 11 years, behaviour changes and suicide attempts followed. Around age 30, he hit rock bottom. He realised it was his chance to wake up and have some sense of normality, which he now has. The lockdown shut down his support, and he was directed to Sutton Men in Sheds, which he calls...
It was a breath of fresh air, because we could talk and share different opinions, ideas, even distract us sometimes. If you're having a really bad day, you can have that little distraction just to clear your mind and refocus on what the goal is at the end.
Dealing with the COVID-19 situation has been difficult, but...
I'm a little bit more prepared, I'm a little bit more settled. But I'm just trying to keep myself busy, keep my family together, and just looking forward to the future, really.
Another member, Ian, was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis some years ago and put on medication. He says his mental state slowly changed, with symptoms such as aggression and paranoia. And in the summer of last year, it came to a crisis point.
I'm currently going through a divorce, which has caused me a lot of anxiety and problems. I've always been the strong person, I've always been the dependable one. I've always taken my responsibilities quite seriously, and in August, September last year, suddenly it was me that needed the help.
He believes men find it difficult to open up.
and on a one-to-one basis they find it tough. Now I've found several groups, one of which is the Men in Sheds, which has been so helpful and supportive, and it's inclusive.
He likes it that they are able to talk freely with no judgment, and in the future
I can help people, I can mentor people, because at the moment that's what I need and that's what I'm getting, and hopefully in the future I can give that back.
Daniel and the group have physical activities planned for the future once restrictions allow. Mental health is an important issue for all. When life becomes hard to handle, support groups like this one can help. Neil Woodrow, NTD News, Sutton, Surrey.
Now the good old vinyl records are making a major comeback. According to UK music industry body BPI, this year vinyl sales are on track to overtake CDs for the first time since 1987. During lockdowns, music fans have been unable to attend live music events, so many spent time and money building up a record collection. The BPI chief executive tells official charts many music lovers prefer vinyl records to CDs as a tangible alternative to online streaming. That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Leese.